installation artist, and by the way, that introduction was really creative. I loved thinking through your words and feeling through your words. That was wonderful. I'm very, very interested in space and utilizing space, and hopefully utilizing space in a sensitive way. All my work is made from an invitation to a museum, which I have pre-planned, pre-researched, pre-made parts, shipped all those parts to the site, and then been on site for 5 or 6 days. You think you could be so well planned, and then you get to the museum and there's always surprises, and that keeps the work fresh. It keeps me fresh. It keeps me on my toes, and makes me think about that engagement with space that has been lifelong interest. This is a piece, and I'm going to start out with a few pieces to introduce the work. A few installations at museums, and then I'm going to go into some conceptual research, and then take you through not really a chronological development, but a peek at the last 25 years and what I've been making. This is a piece that I built at the Holter Museum of Art, moving up to about 30-foot ceiling, made out of hundreds and hundreds of parts. This is a piece that I made for the Racine Museum of Art. Again, pre-researching, pre-laying out the space, pre-making the parts, and then sending those parts to the museum. All of the work in the last 20 years is really centered around the themes of connecting and the theme of thriving. You saw in those first pieces, it was about assemblage and accumulation, lots of parts put together. I'll come back to those pieces and put them more in context as they go through sort of more the career development of their work. But here's yet another piece, another installation made at University of North Carolina, Charlotte. And it was completely woven, made from downed limbs from the power company that went through a central point of the form, and then hundreds of warp threads tied on low, pulled tight high, about 32 feet to a clear story space. And then I used industrial cast-off from the Charlotte area, from the sheeting industry, dipping strings into cotton threads into a slurry of clay and paper, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, the blend of that material and why it's been so important. But I would weave from the base moving upward. One layer, then restring it, another layer, and this is up to 4 layers of weave. For me, the work has always been centered at looking at nature. My research has been looking at the beauty of nature, how things grow, how things decay, the behavior of nature, how things change with mineral and water, to stalactite or stalagmite, or when the river rises and it just deposits the debris around an impediment like a tree. But watching the behavior of nature has been equally gripping as the formal beauty. And the awe of nature, the engineering, the determination. And thinking about who we are. Because ultimately, even though the work starts looking at research in nature, I'm ultimately interested in who we are as human beings. How sensitive we live on the earth, or the lack of sensitivity. So I'm reading urban development, urban theory and architectural theory, and looking at communally how animals thrive and colonization. Back to this piece at University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Here you see the weave, the central limb going from the floor to the ceiling, warp threads tied low, pulled tight. I then have tension, and I can weave with a blend of clay and paper, mixed, dipping the threads in, weaving from the base, moving upward, and then restringing and weaving again. Tremendous commitment in terms of the labor. I can't get everything done at the museum within 5 or 6 days, so we'll start ahead of time, do the research, do the planning, do the part making, and in this case actually wove 8-foot lengths and then shipped them and then move up to the 30-foot mark on a cherry picker, basically just with the help of other people, weaving in and out, in and out, in and out. Another piece that I made for Pullman, Washington, 16 limbs connected to the ceiling. I enjoy very much, like Richard, the sense of materiality. Just the materials and the power of choosing materials that have a metaphor and being able to take just surplus limbs, connecting with simple woodworking, and then tying these weaving structures to the base of those limbs and drag down to a soft drip in this case, weighted with just a pinched clay pinch pot that gives the tension and then weaving to the base of the limb. I know that within the space, it's just such a gracious thing to get an invitation to use space. And I take that ever so carefully, thinking about the architecture that's there. So I'm really thinking about my placement, how I'm connecting to place, how I'm also providing space for you as a viewer. I'm really thinking about accommodating you walking in, moving around the piece, but also having engagement with place. Another piece that I made at University of Washington, Seattle, I teamed up with the horticulture department and chose an invasive plant. They were doing a study on loosestrife. So it felt good to choose a material to bring into the exhibition space that was actually an invasive. So loosestrife was dipped into the slurry of clay and paper and then woven base up. Here you can see the labor. You see the oxidation of the clay. You can see the color change. That's my labor of that day. So 12 inches, 14 inches, and then rest and then move on. So it actually records my sensitivity of touch and my engagement with the form. 16 pieces built in the Myrna Loy Art Center in Helena, Montana. Beautiful basement space that was renovated into a gallery. This was a piece that I built in Pittsburgh, and I made 1,000 handmade sheets of paper. The sheets of paper, when I'm making paper, and I'll get to this, but when I'm making paper, I'm also upcycling. I'm recycling, upcycling old clothes, old table linens that have been torn. They get cut into squares, pulped into a Hollander beater, and then in a slurry of pulp, I'm pulling sheet by sheet by sheet, cooching it onto a big stack of wool. It goes into a press, and then I can form with the handmade sheet of paper a shape, and then coat it with the clay. Then choose to fire it or not fire it. In this case, it's 1,000 sheets of handmade paper, pre-made into shapes, and then dipped into a slurry of this mix of clay and paper, and built one at a time, again, from the base, moving upward. In this case, the space, it had this wonderful recessed ceiling spaces. So I really want to make a piece that you would walk under, look up, and notice, not just engagement with the work, but an engagement with place. Another project that I built is the Fuller Craft Museum. Very much responding to not just this tight space, but also actually responding to my domestic environment in which I was watching my orchids blooming at each other rather than to the sun as I would expect them. And so I really wanted to take on the piece where this energy was in communication with each other, and the pop of the bloom was very much connected to the pop of the bloom of the other forms. Some of these pieces, for those of you that had my workshop yesterday, you're seeing some non-fired pieces, you're seeing some fired pieces, and again, all of those pieces pre-made are assembled in the museum through this mixture of clay and paper, and in this case, plus an adhesive, so that I have strength and durability when the pieces go together. I'm back to the Holter Museum piece. This piece was very much about the concept of the hybridity of bloom and thinking about the accommodation of space, allowing spatially between the hybrid bloom activity. So this goes up to about 30-foot ceiling. You can walk through these pieces, you can walk around the pieces. They swing ever so gently. There's very simple woodworking. Simple standard pegs are connecting all the wood pieces. And again, all of the parts are assembled on site, piece by piece by piece. Where you see a hard edge, it's fired. Where you see a soft edge, it's not fired or handmade paper. Oh, this was a piece that I built for Tulsa, and I use this tight space in which then I crocheted. I can move the ceramic material into the fiber territory because of the strength of the fiber mixed with the clay. So here I've crocheted 99 vines. And I just eliminated the hook. I just crocheted by hand 99 vines connected to the ceiling. And then it was very much about the delicacy of the hook, still being able to sustain the bloom form. Another piece about the disproportionate length of root systems. I mean, nature's miraculous in that way. It does what it needs to do to thrive. And here it's 12 feet of roots with 12 inches of bloom activity on the top of the form. Another project for Skidmore College, very much about the prolificness of bloom. And this is typical of the process. It's good old-fashioned hard work, long hours, and with gracious assistance. I usually have 2, 3, or 4 people helping me on site building the projects. The pieces are either sited permanently within permanent collections, or in some cases I know that the piece is not getting sited permanently, or it's revealed that it's not being sited permanently, and I can actually take the pieces apart. I can disassemble them, recycle the parts, and move the work into the next installation. So in that way, I'm able to upcycle parts after parts after parts. For visual delight, I've put in some technical images here in the middle so that those that you joined me yesterday, but also those that didn't, can see some of the technical processes. It's part building by dipping into the mixture. Mixing clay, mixing fiber, just plunging it and moving to a slurry. There you see the fiber in the clay. I have a tremendous amount of strength. That's why I can move between the grace, between ceramics and fiber processes. I can move between those areas very fluidly. It happens with lots of help. Just digging in part by part by part. Everything is built because there's some structure. So I'm harvesting willow off my land in Helena, Montana, where I live in the summer. I spend 3 months every year when I'm not teaching, working in the studio full time, harvesting the willow, making simple frameworks, and then everything is built within a framework. It's on a structure. It's that combination of tension between structure and organic that I find continually interesting as well. So whether it's woven or woodworking, you can weave flat, you can weave in the round, as you see here. Then I can spray through compressed air a slurry of the paper clay so that I can lay layers and layers of the clay on the form. It becomes very dense, very hard. You can continue to go until it almost serves as a step opening, closes the weave completely up. And here's a shot of the paper making. It's either from harvested flax that I've grown or upcycling old clothes. I have a relationship with Goodwill, what doesn't sell. And they don't put in the landfill, they offer to me twice a year. I do a pickup of blue jeans and torn table linens, and get the opportunity to put those very humble materials back into what I hope can be a beautiful form. So a morning in the studio, maybe 300, 400 sheets of handmade paper, and then turning those into forms, coating them with clay, perhaps loading a kiln or not loading a kiln, whether I'm deciding between firing or non-firing. Here you're seeing garments that are already prepared for the hollander. Here they go into the hollander. I can make large-scale sheets of paper by not pulling through a slurry vat, but actually pouring. And I devised a way to thicken the water so that when I pour into a frame, the paper can settle slowly and very evenly. So here is a thickener that goes into the pulp. That makes sort of a more viscous material. Then pouring it into this frame. And then I can make 8-feet sheets, I can make 10-foot sheets, so on and so forth. I can use the mixture on paper, which is a fantastic way to build for me. Paper is a wonderful substrate, it then fires out if I choose to fire it out. So here I'm making the technique that I taught yesterday, what I call the sandwiches, with the paper clay between the sheets of paper. It can be easily cut and easily built with. Paper then burns away if it's being fired. If it's not, it dries very durable, very, very hard. Or I could turn them into shapes, and those shapes then get turned into the sculptural forms. I make many parts through a slip trailing method, just by literally slip trailing onto a plaster surface. They dry, pop off. And then by the hundreds, I can fire them and then use them to build with. I can dip forms. Those dip forms can then be fired. The paper substrate will burn out. I can paper mache around a simple armature, a wire armature, a straw armature, a paper armature. And a wonderful way to build is also defying sort of the gravity of mush of ceramics. We all can take advantage of the mush of ceramics. It's a soft, moldable material. But to make pieces and allow them to dry, bone dry hard, and then build with them in a dry formation allows you to build very rapidly, and it allows you to build with a lot of negative space. So I can use this method now to dry stack build very large forms, in which you're seeing. This is just pieces of little coils of clay that are dried hard, and then they're cut and pieced one by one, moving upward into these 8, 9, 10-foot, 11-foot stacks, in which then I can negotiate around, such as this piece called Midnight Bloom, after observing my garden in the darkness of the night. They're made so that they can come apart in 3.5-foot sections so that they can be moved to the museum and recited. Some gallery work I'd love to share with you. The installations are such huge marathon projects that the smaller objects are wonderful, not only in terms of the creative spirit within the studio, but it's also wonderful to be able to make things that end up in domestic settings as well. So I'm going to share with you some gallery work. Composite building, 4 square frames that are made separately. They simply hang on the wall with a simple structure on the wall, and conceptually very interested in navigating the perceived boundary, the perceived separateness of it, so that I begin to unify and harmonize within the form. So I'm very interested, especially right now in our political climate, about polarization. So interested in sort of defying that and coalescing and finding the ability of harmony within the form. Turner Larson, these are different gallery shows that I've had where you're seeing the wall pieces. Wall pieces are carried by Dwayne Reed. Many of you I got to meet at SOFA. He takes the work there each year. So again, these frameworks are separate units that are hung and shipped separately, hang on the wall, but when together have this sense of aesthetic connection. A bifold piece that swings, it meets in the middle and swings ever so gently as a diptych. All of the pieces are again utilizing the processes that I got to teach and share with you yesterday, but also through these technical slides that I just shared. Combination of using paper clay mache, sandwiched paper clay between sheets of paper, handmade sheets of paper dipped into clay, either fired or non-fired, utilizing all these different methods. And I continue to invent. These aren't things that someone taught me. They're things that we do as artists, that we invent. We find ways, navigating through the material, to get closer and closer to the essence of what we're thinking about, what we desire to express, and to accomplish an engineering possibility or the ability to clarify the content of the work. Bold red, 4 square, 4 parts. Hard edge means it's fired, soft edge means it's non-fired, brilliant color means it's handmade paper or colored clay fired. Two pieces that were just at Dwayne Reed, each made of 3 segments, all vertical pieces. These are 6.5 feet, right, just about 26 inches wide. 3 triangular shapes put together into this tightness, very much about abundance. And that abundance has really encouraged me to continue to look at, in my research, domestic items that have been made by women. How have botanical motifs been portrayed over history? So I'm looking at rugs, I'm looking at tatting, I'm looking at weaving, I'm looking at my garden. And that encouraged a series of floor pieces. They've been in several shows. They were part of the Woman to Watch program. I don't know if anyone got to see Organic Matters here in DC. That was 4 years ago. 4 floor pieces where the simple wooden work structures on the underside, for the most part, disappear through the abundance of the bloom activity. Very much inspired by looking at historical handcrafts, but also looking at Persian rugs and finding the irony of the Persian rugs, that those beautiful, abundant bloom motifs were made in a dry desert region. They were filling domestic space with glorious color and glorious bloom. Here you can see through these last images how they slide apart, the composites. They're made in sections and they slide together or slide apart for shipping. This is 11 feet long by 6 feet wide. A few studio shots. I work in a wonderful looming original barn space in Helena, Montana during the summer, and it's big enough to roller skate in, but it's perfect for a sculptor. I can move from end to end and really spread out, and that's the view in Helena. I hope you'll all join us. I know there's been many trips to the Archie Bray and to the region, so. A few more gallery pieces. In the central piece, the Colda Sullivan Gallery, the grid form was connected to the ceiling, and the bloom activity, once in place and prolific, actually lifted the framework right off the floor. So sort of navigating and moving the structures is of interest. A very large piece, 10 feet by 8 feet, heliotropic bloom, where the ceramic pieces are actually moving out into space, moving out towards the perceived notion of light. 5-part bloom, 5 sections of building, connecting, and pulling together, and the bloom activity navigating around structure, under and over and through form. Again, they're all separate pieces, so that's just visual connections. It's not physically connecting. And there on the right, you can see a little bit of hard edge and soft edge. So the hard edge is fired pieces. The soft edge, again, is either unfired or handmade paper. I don't dye any of the handmade paper. I'm a trained paper maker. When I went to graduate school for a traditional ceramics background at University of Georgia, I also trained with a paper maker for 2 years. I thought originally that was just a separate interest. And it was just the whole conceptual information about looking at natures and species, how species build, species, squirrel or bird, pulling from the vernacular, pulling from region, pulling what's local materials, connecting. And it was very much earthen materials mixed with fiber materials. That has really encouraged that whole development. Back to some installation work. This is a piece for Perlman Museum. Very intricate grid structures hanging from the ceiling. Very much thinking about who you are as a viewer, how you're approaching this, how I'm accommodating you, and how I'm giving you and hopefully offering you an aesthetic experience not only of the piece but also the space. A little sculptural piece that used that same framework where the bloom activity just sort of engulfs and picks up that structure. Fairly recent piece that will be featured at the upcoming Scripps National, for those of you going to San Diego in that region. That'll open the end of January and be up until through March, I believe. I've woven here large pod circular forms that are about 18, I think I have 18, 16, and 14 feet, quite large, very lightweight. So I've woven in the round, again with a hoop structure, lots of warp threads gathered, connecting at the bottom, weaving from the bottom up, around bloom activity that's on the inside. So this is called double bloom because the bloom activity is both engulfed into the form but negating the form and moving out to the outside of the form as well. They're very lightweight, deceivingly light. They're about 22 pounds. It's quite remarkable. And and very dense. Very dense. You can tap them and they're hard as a rock. So a bit deceiving in that way. And there you see some scale. Very recent piece. This was built for Minneapolis St. Paul, in which I built some intricate wood structures and then was invited to Crane Paper Mill. Crane Paper Mill is in western Massachusetts. It's the site of where all our currency is made. A campus of 2, maybe 3 buildings. It's very nondescript. You wouldn't even know it's there on purpose. And Crane makes beautiful. Have anybody heard of Crane? Yes. They've heard of the high-end papers that they make. They make our currency. So I thought it would be wonderful to do a residency. I'm a trained paper maker. I have this interest. I'm a Massachusetts resident. So I sent out a letter campaign, asked for the possibility of a residency, it would kept coming back, no, we don't do that, no, we don't do that, no, we don't do that. And finally I tried to offer them that I'd be willing to sign waivers that, you know, they're not liable for anything. They could have a camera on me the entire time because they were so worried about counterfeiting because I'm a trained papermaker. Anyway, it resulted into an invitation which was wonderful to work with the industry, and they gave me $1 million offline currency, meaning our currency is taken offline every 5 years. It's shredded and put in the landfill in New Jersey. That's where our currency is. Every 5 years. So I asked for a bail, and they gave me a bail, and it was about 38 pounds or 40 pounds in the bail. It was strapped. It was already shredded, and then I pulped it and made thousands of handmade sheets of paper, and that's what you're seeing. I blended it with blue jeans, so I could kind of have this, you know, this sort of economical metaphor as well as a sort of a humble material, the blue jean. Blended the two and navigated around the structure in which you can move through space. Where you're seeing green, you're seeing money. That has resulted in several other invitations where I've gotten to take that piece apart, basically sort of upcycling the parts, upcycling the money, and this is it currently at the Dahl Museum of Art. I invite everyone to go. It's just east of Kansas City, a beautiful museum, 6 galleries at the museum, wonderful collection, and a beautiful space, and got to build more intricately with the structures, differently with the structures. I got to build for the space and navigate around those structures, utilizing the $1 million plus blue jeans. And I'll leave you with these 3 comparative images of recent installations, and I think Rebecca's going to invite us to open it up for questions for Richard and I.
This is for Rebecca. Those structures look so fragile, so delicate. Are they?
No. Should I step to the mic?
Yeah.
No, I think that's it's perception that they're that fragile, but they really aren't. They're very dense. I mean, those of you that were in the workshop yesterday saw, you know, kind of the stability there. So, you know, I'm very pleased and proud to use that delicacy of the edge, and I think is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And to think that I can make environmental, experiential pieces that could even make us think about being sensitive, that's a great thing as well. But the practicality of it is they're very durable.
This is a question for Rebecca. When you work with other people, when you're putting together the large scale, is it difficult to give up your image because other people, even though you give very good instructions, at 2 in the morning, the show opens at 11, you're like, just stick that on there, just do that. How do you work out your teams?
I think it's a really good question, and actually it's a sensitivity within me, because I really want to make sure my assistants feel honored, respected, and a part of the project. But it is my lead, and it is already preconceived, and it does have a plan. There is some intuitive dance that does happen in the museum, but there's a drawing that's been made, and there's a project that's planned. So I think it's just through the grace of communication and letting, you know, my assistants know how much I appreciate them, and that I sometimes have to give things up, but at times I have to stand on the floor and trust who's on the ladder or on the cherry picker and say a little to the left, because I can't see the piece if I'm on the cherry picker when I need to be down on the floor. So it's about graceful communication and teamwork and respect. Totally. Totally.
I have an actual question now. For both of you. as an artist, as a ceramics artist, I know what I like to do. I like to work with wood and imitate nature. But I struggle to find my voice. How do you guys find your voice as an artist?
When I'm teaching, I say notice what you're noticing. Spend time with the things that float continually to the forefront. And then there's a thread between it all. So I actually have students collect source books of source material. I ask them to make a public lecture in which they condense that material to a 15-minute presentation in which the sources outline the burning questions and interests that they have. But really to be kind to yourself and know that it's a building of time and care, and noticing what you notice and finding the thread between it.
I have a technical question for Rebecca. This might be boring to a lot of people, but even though your installation pieces can be very large, very tall, I get the sense that they are an aggregate of fired and unfired pieces, but it doesn't really seem like you fire any complex multi-component pieces. You fire a bunch of small pieces and then you weave them or glue them or somehow stucco them in together.
That's correct. So what you're seeing in terms of totality of the forms are all assembled through non-firing processes. That's the mix of the clay, the fiber, plus an adhesive. So you're correct.
All right. So
I'm not firing huge conglomerates of forms.
another question. Obviously, organic materials that you use to form your paper, to do sculptural forming, they will burn off during the firing. But what about when you have a slurry of fiber and the fiber is actually incorporated in the clay? How does that molecularly change to strengthen, that thin piece of terracotta or ceramic?
Wonderful question. Fiber creates strength when mixed with clay. So think of adobe architecture around the world. Mali or Santa Fe, wherever it may be. It is the mixture of material from the vernacular, from the region. It's straw or hay plus clay. It increases the strength of clay up to 40%. So you can put 40% fiber with clay and you've increased the strength of the form, even without a glue, even without an adhesive.
So now I have another technical question. Those big tall pods?
Yes.
Were those fired?
No.
Okay, so that was a dry adobe mix that you sprayed onto the...
No, an actual wet
So it's
slurry of paper clay was sprayed on those woven forms.
And so that, if that got wet, it would...
It would never disintegrate because there's an adhesive
Oh, so
in
the
it. It
adhesive
dries. It dries very brick
Okay,
hard.
gotcha.
Very brick hard.
When you're using glue, do you use something like silicone that's movable, or what kind of glue do you use?
No, any water-soluble glue.
Okay.
That can be PVA, Elmer's. I use a wallpaper paste often because that's a methyl cellulose. It's a great way to mix. You can use a latex house paint. It's fantastic. Anything water-soluble mixed with the clay and the fiber will end up with a very solid brick-hard adobe form that's air-dried, non-fired.
All right.